me, sir.
Hello, everyone. So I know I reviewed the movie about a week ago, and since then, there has been a bit of a discussion between the actual fan community of Stephen King and critics, and pretty much the overall reception of the movie hasn't really been that positive. In fact, I recently looked on Rotten Tomatoes. It's like 24% aggregate and a 4.8% overall user rating. I don't typically look at those things, but when you have like a fan reception that's also like 38% enjoyed it, it's kind of an odd thing coming from a Stephen King production. But today I have a special guest, Brendan. He is an avid Stephen King reader. He's read pretty much most of his novels and novellas, and has watched some of the movies. This is going to be an actual spoiler review. I've already done a spoiler-free review, so if you want to know some of my other thoughts on the film, go check that one out. It's the first episode of this Stephen King month that I've been doing. So yeah, we're going to go into like pre-production, post-production, like how long this film has been actually in development, some of the more deeper stuff about the film. So yeah, so we'll start off with Brendan and his thoughts on the Stephen King Dark Tower book series.
Well, I've been reading the Dark Tower. I started reading the Dark Tower series in high school, but I pretty much started reading Stephen King novels in junior high. And one of the first ones was Eyes of the Dragon, which is kind of a prequel to the Dark Tower series. And I know that Stephen King was challenged by his kids. They wanted to read something that he wrote, but they wanted to be something more for kids, and so it was a challenge to him. He went and wrote Eyes of the Dragon for his kids, which is kind of like a fairy tale, and it revolves around a fantasy land and knights and kings and stuff, and that was kind of a precursor to the Dark Tower series, which I know Stephen King tells in the forewords of the books that he has been writing this since he was in high school. So he didn't even actually finish the first book until the early 80s, I believe. And so immediately, as soon as he finished that book, which I think is, in my opinion, is kind of dry, the first book, The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger. I have the collection of the ones that have pictures in them, which I recommend. Anyone who's interested in reading these, they need to get the ones with the pictures in them. I was just recently in a bookstore in Spokane, and the new ones don't even have the pictures in them, which I'm like, why would you even buy them? The paintings are amazing. It gives you an idea of what's going on in his world. So anyways, the first book is a lot like the movie. Not exactly like the movie, but parts of the book are in the movie. The scene with Jake and the Guardian, the Portal Guardian, it's very like one of the books. Also, how he faces the Man in Black who follows him through the desert. So mostly the first book, it involves in his world, and the movie does not. It's entirely in New York.
Yeah.
So,
which is one thing I kind of found odd about the film. Like, you have this huge, expansive universe, like the Dark Tower, but yet we only see two of these worlds. We only see New York, because obviously Sony has more advertising space in New York. But you also get Midworld, which isn't, in my opinion, wasn't really fully fleshed out as a concept.
right.
It just felt like they had a lot of interesting concepts, but they were afraid to actually go into and elevate those concepts just a bit. There's just so many things about this universe that isn't fully explained. And there is kind of a reason for that. This whole production with Dark Tower started back in 2007, and was originally going to be helmed by Ron Howard, believe it or not, which he was actually attached as producer of this film. And it's just kind of frustrating to me how it went through 3 different directors. First off, the script was rewritten 15 times by three different writers, and we finally get this film, and it felt very incoherent with a lot of its concepts to me. And it's not like, again, when I think of The Dark Tower, I think of just so many fantastical concepts. It's multi-genre, but it just felt like they wanted to go for that one genre, because apparently you can't multi-genre like, you know, Marvel Cinematic Universe has been doing with, like, Doctor Strange, with its fantasy and action and spiritual aspects about that film. Apparently Dark Tower just doesn't seem to want to go into that deeper aspect about what makes Dark Tower Dark Tower.
And then, especially the length of the movie is so short, painfully short. It's like the length of a cartoon, a typical cartoon.
Like a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah, and, you know, that's great for cartoons, but for a movie that's kind of like Lord of the Rings, Stephen King's version of Lord of the Rings, even for me, even just to flesh out the story, to make you care about the characters, you need time.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a problem with some movies today. They don't take the time.
Yeah.
They're too ready to get to the story and get on with the action, and what about the characters, you know?
Yeah, and that's another thing that I found very faulty. Despite some likable actors, like the kid who plays Jake is a standout to me. I think he has a good future as an actor if he just works on it just a tiny bit more. Idris Elba is obviously a great badass.
He was awesome.
He was pretty good. And then Matthew McConaughey, you know, with all of his Lincoln commercials, he's still the most cheesiest guy in the film, but he's also the most threatening guy in the film. That is a problem I pointed out too with the running time. It should have been at least another hour, and they could have made this world a little bit more coherent for the audience to actually understand what this world is truly about. Like general audiences get what this is about. Like, The Dark Tower is the centerfold for pretty much most of Stephen King's source material. It's the Avengers of everything. It's the one piece that connects everything to anything else. And the other sad part about this is that with the source material, you think they would have a higher budget. Turns out, Sony screwed the pooch on this one and gave it $60 million. Only $60 million for a source material like this.
They must have not felt very strongly about it.
Yeah.
There's a huge risk involved. I know that when movies in general it's called branding. They want to create a universe. Well, it's hard to come out with something new. That's
Right.
why we have so many sequels. That's why we have so many spin-offs or just extensions off of something that's already been made. And to come up with something new today is such a huge risk. And there's companies, they just don't get behind them.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why they were very hesitant with this franchise is that Sony themselves has had a problem with franchises. If you look at their history with franchises, they originally had, like, Spider-Man. First 2 movies, great. Third movie, way too much intervention. And then they rebooted the brand. And they tried to maintain their brand by making a new storyline, which, to be fair, I did comment on this when I reviewed the Amazing Spider-Man films, is that I like the concept of them trying to figure out, you know, where the parents are, because it's only been explored in the comics very briefly. And it would have made for a really interesting story topic, but not for a trilogy. And due to the fan backlash and critical backlash, you know, they weren't too happy with those films, and so they lost that brand to Marvel. Granted, Sony still owns much of the brand, but they are in cohorts with Marvel Studios. But since then, they've tried to make franchises out of other things. They've tried Ghostbusters, they've tried, they already tried to do Amazing Spider-Man, obviously, and they're so desperate for a franchise that, you know, it's obvious, you know, anyone could make a Stephen King movie a franchise. Like Dark Tower is definitely one of those movies you could make a 8-movie franchise. You pretty much could. But they don't have that staying power. They don't believe in the whole franchise thing, apparently. Which is kind of sad when you think that Ghostbusters from last year was supposed to start this franchise, but it didn't make enough money because they didn't care about it. And it's also telling when, you have the first quarter of Sony Pictures Entertainment being the lowest it's been in years. If Sony wants to continue its filming department, its picture department, they need a franchise. They could have easily have done what New Line Cinema did with Lord of the Rings. They started out with $50 million for all 3 movies. But then they kept adding more money to the budget, adding more money to their budget, and it went. It's probably one of the most highest budget independent films, the film trilogies of all time, and it won Academy Awards. This could have been their Lord of the Rings, but they didn't put enough money or effort behind it.
My take on it, just going into seeing the previews for the movie, I worked in the theater for 14 years, and when I see previews of movies where it's nothing but action, they're trying to get people who like that kind of thing. I don't. I like action, but I want to see, and there are previews that give the whole movie away. That's another part.
Yeah.
But when I saw the preview for this, I was like, really? Is this just going to be a pure action movie? And all the shooting, I was like, this is kind of Matrix-y and kind of like a shooting action flick. And that is not what these 8 books and something that I've spent a lot of money and time reading and enjoying, it's not really what the story is about at all.
Yeah.
It's about an epic trek to the tower, and it kind of resembles a lot of different things like Wizard of Oz and Lord of the Rings, and then when I think of Roland, I think of Clint Eastwood in the spaghetti western films, and I own a lot of these. There's probably like 20 of them, and the 7th book. When I see this cover, I think, that's what Roland looks like. And, I like Idris and I liked Matthew McConaughey, so they did find some good actors. So, and that's the thing, when you make movies, you want to make sure that people want to see them. And so they kind of attach these actors and actresses, and then people are like, oh, I want to see it because that person is in it. But, I think they did it okay with the casting.
Right. And that's one area of controversy that went around with the film was the casting. Initially, when it was reported that Matthew McConaughey was cast in the film, many people online, I was noticing this, is like, oh, is he going to play Roland Deschain? And then they cast Idris Elba, and they're like, oh, is he going to be the Man in Black? Well, turns out they flipped that role. Now, I don't know whether or not they did this because, it was going to be a controversial casting thing if they had a black guy play the Man in Black, because, people who are hypersensitive to politics in film will be like, oh, well, they cast a black guy as the evil person. It's like with King Kong in 1923. It's like, no, it's not. But in either case, I think both of them would have been pretty good choices. Although there are some people who would suggest that if they ever did a Stand, like the Stand movie, they would want to have Matthew McConaughey as the
Walter.
Walter. Yeah, they would want him as Walter in that movie, which I could kind of see. I could kind of see that happening. This movie's kind of a mess. So, to me at least, it's a bit of a mess. I enjoyed it, but it is a bit of a mess.
Well, the other part is, over time, Stephen King was putting these ideas together. Like, as soon as the 2nd book came out and I read it, I was like, oh my god. As soon as I started reading it, I was like, I am hooked. And you know, they hit bestsellers lists. All three books, two books they were on the bestsellers list at the same time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't alone, and I was like, man, I totally love this, and this is the best thing that Stephen King's ever made. And he started seeing the patterns, you know, the young people with powers like Firestarter or Carrie, or and a very long branch of characters in Stephen King's books that actually have powers that they like The Shining, that can communicate through telepathy, or they can move things. And then the other books that have portals, like there's a doorway to another world at the end of the book. Or The Stand, where you have a whole different world. So, you know, got our world, and you have this world that's kind of like our world. And then you've got Roland's world. As you're reading about it, you're like, oh, wow, you know, he lives in this world that had a giant war, and he's the only gunslinger left. He was kind of like a knight at one time. Everybody respected him. But now his world is all old and wasted from radiation and stuff. And it just goes on and on. I love the portals, and like Stephen King said, that he's built this universe, you know, the solar system, but the Dark Tower is his Jupiter. And once I really got to like the third book, I was like, oh, this is so amazing, you know. But the fourth, I think, is the best one, and hopefully the movie is successful enough, either in the television series that's going to come out, hopefully, or whatever. Yeah. This is one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time, and it's a romance. It's about the person that he fell in love with. And there's a side story involves a witch, but pretty much it's just about Roland and his love. It's a romance novel, and it's so good. I bought the deluxe version. It's got these beautiful paintings in there. It blows me away.
So the one thing when this film started, it started out with this opening text crawl. You know that sometimes bad movies just start with that text crawl. And it's something that I've noticed with also King Arthur Legend of the Sword, both of which were written by Akiva Goldsman, which also wrote The Mummy this year too. Like
How was that?
The Mummy was just garbage. It's like,
yeah.
They try so hard to like they try way too hard to be, you know, like putting all these Easter eggs in there, which is also kind of something I found with this movie as well, is that they try too hard to convince you that this world is connected to all the other Stephen King universes.
Actually, I didn't see too much. They showed a little sign with the Pennywise, you know.
Yeah.
I did see that, and at the very end they showed the roses, which only Stephen King fans would know that. Yeah. The major portal to the tower lies in the Rose in New York, and so they've got people like my wife who has no clue what's going on, but she enjoyed it.
I mean, there was more references that I noticed the first time around. Like when Roland Deschain is describing, you know, how the Dark Tower fits into everything and how it's protecting us, he uses a spider as the outside force, and pretty much Stephen King fans would know is like, that's Pennywise. That's another Pennywise reference. In one shot, like in the 2-second, 3-second shot, you could see a Saint Bernard, which is Cujo. When the man in black is walking on the streets of New York and he sees his kid like with an ice cream, he says hate. I kind of want to believe that may be like a Carrie reference. Like she'll grow up to be Carrie or something like that in the modern day. There in one of the shots, like one of Jake's friends is over at his apartment, and he just rolls this car that looks like Christine, this little toy car. That's the Christine car. It's like early on in the movie, but like it's not like the references and Easter eggs aren't really in your face, but there's some things that I felt like you're going a little bit too far here with some of this stuff. Which is kind of interesting. This is a film that tries too hard, but yet not enough. It's like...
It's passive-aggressive.
Yeah, it's a passive-aggressive film that just kind of feels like a meh emoji. I mean, granted, if I had to choose between The Dark Tower and the Emoji Movie, I'd go with The Dark Tower. I mean, I've already done like a 5-minute rant about how bad the Emoji Movie was. Just like, I'd take this one over the other one.
I think that if they do have a director's cut, I totally would buy it, and I think that it would be better. If they added even a half hour, an hour, just to make... I mean, they had some beautiful shots in there, but they just weren't... It was just too brief.
Now, like, I had some ideas on how they could have fixed this film. Now, it was originally planned that instead of the opening text, there was going to be a 5-minute visualization of how this world works, and it would have helped the audience to understand how this world works until Roland replays the whole thing again. But
they should have had Peter Jackson do this.
I could have seen a Peter Jackson version.
Or Guillermo.
Oh, Guillermo del Toro.
I
could see
anything
that.
like that. Those guys are amazing.
I mean, he's not really... Guillermo del Toro doesn't really do franchises much anymore. He does his own thing. Like, he got screwed...
They kicked him off of Pacific Rim.
Well,
or
no, he left Pacific Rim. He doesn't like to do franchises. That's why he didn't want to do a Hellboy 3, is that people with Hellboy 2 didn't like his direction, apparently.
I liked Hellboy 2.
Yeah.
But there's some people that don't.
That's true. And, like, he was going to do a Haunted Mansion reboot, which could have been awesome, because comparatively, between the Eddie Murphy version and what he could have done, it would have been vastly different. But because Disney didn't want to continue with him, he made his own Haunted Mansion film, Crimson Peak, and that was okay, I guess. The one thing that has been kind of staggering some fans about this film is the way they ended The Man in Black. Now, there is a fan theory that states that this is the actual end story. This is the final story of Roland. There is some evidence to actually point to that direction. When before the final confrontation between the Man in Black and Roland, he says one last time around the wheel, and he already has the horn. Idris Elba has the horn.
Right.
So it is possible that this is the final conclusion to the storyline. And it got spoiled for me with Book 7 that every time he gets to the Dark Tower, everything gets reset.
Right.
And it's just this unfair journey for him, because he's being punished for all the things that he's done. Because the purest of hearts has to, in order to get into the Dark Tower, you have to be the purest of hearts. And because he just keeps screwing the pooch with all of his side companions.
Well, it's foretold that he has to sacrifice them.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. I mean, as I'm reading it, I fell in love with Jake. I fell in love with some aspects of Odetta, and I fell in love with, what's his name, Eddie, and Oi. So there's this little dog thing. It's called a bumbler, and there's just the little bits and pieces where it's not one of those Jar Jar Binks kind of characters.
Oh God, I hope not.
It's like classic, like it's really good, and
that'd be kind of...
the Bumbler is the first one to go, and I was like, oh man, oh no, Jake is the first. Well, Jake dies twice, but the first time you have no emotional attachment. The second time, when he dies and the Bumbler doesn't want to leave his body, oh my God, I think I started crying when I was reading that. I was blown away. And then ahead of time that these characters are going to die, because that's the only way Roland's going to get to the tower. And then when they do, it's just like, wow, I can't believe it. It's happened finally.
One thing also that some critics, including myself, have pointed out is that through all the violence and brutality that's in this film, they could have gone with an R rating. I could have seen an R rating version for this version, because of all the gunslinging and the Man in Black basically burning people alive.
Yeah.
You could visually do that interesting, but they don't really do anything about it. It's just like, oh, well, he dies off screen, there's no blood splatter here, there's just all this stuff. And you have this brutal guy that can pretty much pistol whip you in a matter of seconds. And they don't have it. It's just all dumbed down and PG-13. I mean, I can understand why. It's a business, and pretty much the most valuable demographic is the teenager crowd. They have more time, they have more money. Well, maybe if they work at McDonald's, they'll have more money. But that's the most valuable demographic when it comes to marketing films. And what I thought Sony saw was just like an action franchise with some horror elements, and fantasy elements, and sci-fi elements, which could have also led some people to kind of disagree with the film, is the fact that there's just so many genres trying to go together that the script just didn't work. They could have mixed all these elements together in a much better way, but I kind of felt that it didn't fully get there. Where it was like just interwoven into the narrative.
Money-wise, how has it done?
It hasn't really been doing so well.
I used to check out IMDb all the time, but then I just haven't checked it out.
It got $20 million last weekend. And going by this rate, they need to make $120 million in order to break even. Now, it is possible that it could get some more money with home video sales, but with the current trend of bad franchises from Sony versus home video sales, like with Ghostbusters, it still didn't make its money back. So I'm kind of optimistic you could make a sequel out of this, but they're already planning the TV series to be the sequel to the movie, where it's supposed to be Roland and Jake in the Dark Tower universe, which could work. I mean, you could salvage the franchise at that point, but there is a problem, is that Stephen King isn't meant for television. The way Stephen King describes a lot of his stuff in his books would lend itself better to film. And you can get away with much more stuff in film than you would television. Now, there is a hypothetical way you could do Stephen King in TV. If you go on, say, HBO or Netflix or Hulu, you can get away with much more violence or pretty much whatever subject matter you could think of at that point. But with mainstream media, like with CBS and ABC, you couldn't get away with some of the stuff that the books could do. Which is something that I kind of find interesting, and that is going to be part of the discussion for Stephen King's It, is that there is some stuff that just doesn't correlate, that can't be translated to TV. Because of, like, the stupid Nielsen ratings and TV boards.
I think a lot of Stephen King stuff has become more accessible on TV because, I mean, Hulu did a mini-series about the JFK assassination. It was one of Stephen King's novels. Amazing novel. I loved it.
11/22/63.
Yeah. And then when what's his name that he directed the Green Mile and Shawshank and in the Mist.
Oh god,
movie.
he was Frank Darabont.
Yeah, Frank Darabont. That's another person that should have done this.
Yeah, Frank Darabont. Just give him all the Stephen King rights. He knows how to make a good film. I kind of find it sad though that like he had a good first season of The Walking Dead and then he was kicked off. He was kicked off The Walking Dead.
The best season.
The best season is season 1.
Season 1.
And you know, Frank Darabont has a way to make a movie. This was made by a first-time director, which, to his credit, he is trying something that most first-time directors couldn't really do, is helm a franchise like this. Sometimes you can get first-time directors to make a great film, and sometimes you just can't. It just seems like the natural trend now that you have these dispensable franchises. Granted, The Dark Tower isn't supposed to be dispensable, but it just seemed to be like, oh, well, we need to find the best, introductory filmmaker. Why rely on outside talent when we have perfect first-time material here, and if it's bad, they can direct all the blame to him and not to us.
So I'm hoping if they do have the next either the television series or the another movie, they move forward with Drawing of the Three, which is where Roland, in the book anyways, he wakes up on the beach after he's defeated Walter, and this crab is like chewing his fingers off because he was passed
God.
out. That's it blows me away, that first part of the book. And then so he kills this crab thing, and then he walks over and there's these doorways, like these it's like trees or something, and there's a doorway in the tree, and above the doorway is a name, like the prisoner, the junkie, or whatever. And so when he goes through this doorway, he comes into our world, into to catch these people and bring them back to his world, and that's where he introduces the other characters that are necessary for the rest of the story. And so if they do something similar like that, that would be great. I don't know, because this is supposed to be the end of a sequel to the end of the story. Or if they're going to actually go back and just start over from the beginning and actually tell the story like it should have been told, I don't know.
Like, I think how they should have just started the movie was just translate the first page and a half of The Gunslinger. It's such vivid imagery. You can automatically just start with Roland chasing some figure across the wasteland. You can just start with that. You can start with what Jake dreams about. You know, like when Jake is dreaming about the gunslinger and he's talking with his dad, you could have just started with that. It would have set up the relationship with the Man in Black much sooner than you would have just waiting like 30, 40 minutes into the film to set up that relationship.
What I didn't like was how much they already have told the viewer about the tower and the breakers, the people who go around collecting these people with powers. Like they got this headquarters thing going on in New York, which is and kind of, it's in the book Insomnia, and it is towards the end of the Dark Tower story. You do see that there is a headquarters of these people that are trying to break the tower down, but Walter is not in there. It's the Crimson King. The Crimson King is involved in all of this. The Crimson King is also, he's got other names, but he goes around destroying worlds, and if he can destroy the Dark Tower, he destroys them all. Mm-hmm. And that's his whole sole purpose. He's basically like a Satan, like Stephen King's version of Satan, and you get to see a lot of him in The Stand. That's where he kind of is first introduced, but he's in some other books too.
Yeah, he's also kind of mentioned in Stephen King's It as well, as a higher person or a higher entity than even Pennywise is. To sum it all up, I thought the movie was entertaining, but it definitely isn't a movie. It's just, it has entertaining moments, but they have so many concepts that you just leave there and you don't delve deeper into. It suffered from a shorter runtime than it needed to be. It suffered from a less than stellar budget, which is just baffling to me. Characters go in and out sometimes without even question. The violence is toned down, and overall, at the box office, I don't even know if it will make back even its production budget. It won't make. It definitely won't make back its own marketing budget at this point. There's a way you can salvage it, but I don't know. Last thoughts?
I didn't think it was a bad first version of the Dark Tower. There's stories that are really like hard to translate to film. Like they said that the Watchmen was going to be impossible to translate. Like so many people had tried, and they said this is going to fail. And well, along came digital, just like the Marvel superhero movies. They've been wanting to make these superhero movies for decades, and finally, the technology is there, the writing is there, the fan base is there. But Dark Tower is such a niche thing. there are a lot of Stephen King fans. I mean, I've been reading him forever. There's a lot of other people who've been reading his books forever. But I didn't think it was a bad first version of The Dark Tower. I just think that if they can find a better outlet on TV, even though I kind of have hesitations about TV, like The Mist is on right now. I'm watching it. It's alright.
The Mist is. I dropped off after the first couple episodes.
There's too much talking.
I feel like with the Mist TV show, they're just not like there's characters that annoy the hell out of me.
But they take like this short story. There's like 50 pages, and those 50 pages were great. But then, hey, let's make a television series out of those 50 pages, and it's happened over and over again with Stephen King stories.
And then replace all the creatures with like bugs, because that's always fun, right? Watching a Stephen King story with bugs.
Which I think The Mist also is a connection to The Dark Tower.
Yeah, The Mist is a connection.
The release and the compound of this gas thing was done by the Crimson King.
Yeah. And, and the Mist, the movie The Mist is such a good adaptation. Like, it keeps the whole...
oh, yeah, that movie was so good.
Yeah, the movie's
except for
great.
the bummer ending.
Oh, God, the
I
ending
love
was
the
so
ending.
great.
Was that French ending where you're like... It's not a happy
ending. It's totally
ending.
the neo-realist.
I love that.
It's totally the Italian neo-realist type ending where it's just like, yeah, everything's shit. This is life.
What was that movie with David Duchovny and it's about the apocalypse, like the biblical apocalypse?
I can't remember.
And it's such a bummer. And I was like, that's when I see The Mist, the movie ending, and it makes me think about that movie. I'm like, oh my gosh, people are not gonna like this, but I loved it.
Yeah, like it keeps the whole, like the movie itself keeps the whole Hitchcockian, or not Hitchcockian, Lovecraftian elements of the creatures there. Like you still don't get where they're from. It neither in the novella or in the movie, and that's a staple trademark of a Lovecraftian creatures that you don't know where they're from. They have an otherworldly presence, but you just don't know where they're from. Films like Oculus kind of do that as well. You have a mirror that you don't know where they're from, but it's a thing that can kill you with its own magic, and it stays within its own rules. But like the TV show to me is just kind of like it feels like they want to modernize it to the point where it's just like we gotta shove some politics in here at some point. Some of the characters are just cringy dialogue. Like the friend of the girl who gets raped in the first episode, like he has some of the most cringiest lines. It's like, I'm just gonna enjoy this with my male privilege, or like, just cringe. Like you couldn't make the line more interesting, or like enjoyably interesting. Like I understand that a staple of Stephen King productions is usually some cheesy acting. But this goes beyond cheese. It goes, like, moldy, rotten cheese that's just cringy to look at. And then the mother, like, I remember watching the first episode with my mom, and the reaction to the mother in this TV series is like, oh, she's just not that great of a person. Because, like, she's, like, the person that wears the pants in the family, and the father's just being useless, but he's trying to help his daughter out. I just kind of dropped after episode 3. There's some good actors in this one, and I kind of felt like it's the story so far is just not that great, and I just dropped it.
Yeah. Well, I just was waiting for the suspense. You're like,
but
well, you got this mist going on, but hardly anybody's dying, or where's the terror? Well, it actually got to one of the episodes where the guy had to do surgery. But he wasn't a doctor. The doctor had to tell him how to do the surgery.
Yeah.
Oh my God! In the wing of the hospital that has the mist in it, and so this guy has this rebar that's stuck in his leg, and he shoots him with the painkiller, pulls that rebar out of his leg, and I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And then staples it shut,
I almost thought that, like, the hospital stuff was like a sequel to Kingdom Hospital.
Oh, I did not get to see very much of that.
Oh, that series. I remember watching that series when I was a kid, and my dad was like, "Never tell anyone I'm showing you this." And then, like an idiot, I just blurt out like, "Oh, well, you know, I've been watching this show. You should watch it too." You know, and then my dad's like, "Nah, you're not watching that anymore." So yeah, Dark Tower, bit of a mess, but it's kind of enjoyable. I'll see you guys in the next video, maybe. Peace.
Nice to meet you, everybody.